system would go, wow, this system is not going to function at the speed of need of the community.
What is so important is that we have a structure and a container here where we can disagree. We can have some conflict. We can say, well, I think it needs to be this. And somebody else can say, well, I think it needs to be this.
Patient one walks through the door who'd been sitting in a jail for 6 months, right? That brings like a sense of immense gratitude and humility that we've now done exactly what we said we were going to do. Here we are, 30 days, post-opening doors, March 12th, 2026. We've had very different experiences throughout the process. CEO, COO, leadership has taken innumerable forms over the first 30 days of us being open. What are some of the challenges?
I think I want to start by saying what has become very clear over the last 30 days is almost in some ways going back to a discussion we had many months ago, maybe a year ago. No, maybe in the summer when you said, I'm worried about patient 1,000. And I said,
I'm worried about patient one.
Because if we don't get that right, there is no 1,000. So I think what continues to happen for me in the day as we hear it, 30 days, is that the structure is in place for patient one. So I'm good. And some of the overarching things we talk about for the learning for me is systems, is how do systems work together? What systems haven't worked that well? What haven't in their operations like led us to where we want to be with those things? So that's been excellent learning. And some of the challenges is figuring those things out, why they're not working, what does work, how do we have to modify, how do we have to fix that stuff. Where I'm at now, though, is with a great sense of hope and gratitude and a little bit of self-affirmation that many of the systems do work, that they have the kinks of those have to be worked out on a day-to-day basis. But many of those systems work, which then aligns me with the notion of we've been in startup. We have clients now that's real. We have a system that's open, that's starting to work. And we can talk about how we're ensuring that people can access that system and pay for the care. But for now, like the bones, more than the bones and some tendons and some ligaments, it's still one of those body things with no skin. But the bones and the ligaments and the skin and the muscles, like they're there in place. And now it's fine tuning that. So as we look forward, or certainly from my position, as I look forward, there's a structure in place. And the structure is what's so important to me because it's what protects the mission. It's what protects our values and is what creates this container wherein which those things happen and that those are the choices that our staff make. We're guiding them towards like, here's the framework and structure we want to live in so that you can make these choices and live out the vision and the mission for yourselves and for our clients. So that's where I'm kind of at the end of 30 days. I feel very hopeful and focused and grounded as we kind of move forward. And again, knowing that we put some systems in place and it's a good start and we're moving forward with that. That's where I'm at. What's it been like for you for these 30 days?
Well, something that resonates really deeply with what you just said, and I'm sure that you've said this before, and I'm sure maybe it's just, I've heard it now for the 1,000th time, but it like really hit home, is the idea that the operational wherewithal, the system, the processes, the architecture is what protects the mission, the vision, and the values. It's just a really interesting way to think about how to take it from right up here and then bring it down, and then here's the architecture that not only supports it, grows it, but really protects that. And it's just a really resonant piece there.
So I think for me, again, going back to what we started with, which is that, I think our relationship of working is very symbiotic. So the more visionary you get, the more kind of grounded and structured I get. I think what's happened for me, particularly over these last 30 days and over probably the next 30, as we really fine tune the structure, the architecture, is that the more solidified that gets, the more it begins to operate in a way that has some expectation to it, that it's going to produce things that we're looking for. the more comfortable I feel moving into probably what is more like a stewardship role. But what it does for me is allows me to look out. It allows me to look forward and say, okay, like now I can talk about that next initiative. Now I can talk about that next acquisition, if that's what happens, because I am feeling daily more confident that the structure is in place to protect when we move to wherever, South Dakota, Wyoming, New Mexico, whatever that is. Um, my confidence in that system grows every day. So,
And it allows you to start playing more in vision.
yeah.
Yeah. That is an interesting piece of our dynamic, which is the more that I go this way, you root down,
Yeah.
right? So you root deep into the granular as I come more out here, and then we'll come back a little bit and talk more operationally and then go back here. And it's that really interesting dynamic between you and I.
It's helpful for me to understand it though, which is that it's not divisive. It doesn't actually separate us. It actually makes us our working relationship, but also the structure of here. It makes it safer. It makes it more contained. It makes it more held in such a way. Uh, so so that's been the 30 days for me. That's what's been like really operant when I sort of sit and reflect about where we are.
Yeah.
What about for you then? What's it been like? I mean, I think one of your questions frequently is, what did we learn in these 30 days? Or what is, what's the key thing that's kind of come up out of the bubble that shows me, oh, I need to address this, or I need to work with this, or this was something I hadn't thought about.
I mean, there's so many. So I go back and reflect on like day one, right? And so we've had this idea for so long, and everything exists is very ethereal. Even when we're building and that there's physical buildings and physical people and all this, there's still nobody walking in the door. There's still no patient one. Patient one walks through the door who'd been sitting in a jail for 6 months because there was no access to care, right? That brings like a sense of course, just immense gratitude and humility that like we've now done exactly what we said we were going to do, which was create an accessible space for people to leave jails where they're being housed for mental health care and into systems. And that was like a very emotional moment, and just sitting in that and being deeply grateful for the work that we've all done. And like, wow, like now this thing is really real. And then of course it's back to, oh boy, this thing didn't work and we've got to shift gears. And I think probably, and I said this right before we sat down, the thing that I notice more than anything is how insulated I've become because of the work that you and David do, right? So that idea that, we've constructed such a wonderful team and architecture, not only for the three of us and how we work together, but then our director level, right? And everybody, underneath. And that so many of the things on the day-to-day become insulated from me, right? So I hear about something 3 or 4 days later, but that was dealt with 3 or 4 days before. And that's never been my experience in an organization. It's always been that, like, in some sense, I'm a lightning rod for anything that's going on within the organization. And that becomes really overwhelming because it's also, I have other things to focus on and tasks. And so when I start hearing about, a system not working, a process that we need to redesign a little bit or tweak, those things all start living in my head as well, even though I don't have anything to do with them. And so I think definitely a sense of like peace and groundedness around like our team really has it, no matter what's going on and no matter how people feel in the moments of, anxiety or panic or this thing didn't work. And it's okay, but much of that is insulated from me. I guess more from like a general perspective, it's now that it is so real, there are so many things that have to change. In particular, of course, in my world is now that we, in the current state we are, can't serve a majority of the phone calls that we're getting in.
Yeah.
So we had really designed this entire, right, 2+ year embedding into a community and building our reputation and our relationships and our connections and our presence and becoming a part of this community and then really establishing, right, these pillars, one being really accessible care and and all of that, and then not being able to serve, right, that population has now presented a whole new set of challenges, which is the marketing as we designed it worked. It worked really well, right? Like in the examples are, 180 calls, per week, right? 60 plus of them are qualified, could enter care that we can provide. And yet we ultimately can't.
And what percentage of those are our specific mandate, which is clients in the criminal justice system or with Medicaid funding. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
So then it's like, okay, like we're like now, like we're in the game. I mean, it's the first inning, but we're thinking about, okay, if this is a 7-game series and we're in the first inning, okay,
And we're not wild about the umpire calls. Like, he clearly doesn't understand that at the knees is in the strike zone.
yeah, exactly, and maybe the most powerful thing that sits with me, and I think I've repeated this pretty consistently, is that maybe the biggest realization is that the system does not move at the speed of urgency. And so that is something that like I very much me, right? Like I very optimistic and very hopeful, and that can be a downside as well, because sometimes I won't take into consideration the what if, like the worst case scenarios. And it was like, of course, if we create this,
We build it.
if we create, and not just build it, they will come. But boy, all the work we did around it, that the system would go, wow, this is such a big need that is now being, like, now there's access to it. And yet the system is not going to function at the speed of need of the community.
But in that metaphor, I just want to be clear. It first is, if you build it, he will come. And we know that this is not a good strategy in this arena.
Yeah.
Right? Just build it. They'll show up. Don't worry about it. Right. But it goes further, right? Because in the end, he then says, eases pain. But in the end, he says, it was you, Ray. And he says, it was you. And he says, no, Ray, it was you. So, and again, this is our perspective. I'm going to make the link. This is our perspective that I think is different. Again, is that for me, what these 30 days have shown is the architecture is there. We need to continue to create and build and fix and tweak. The architecture is there.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'll come eventually. He'll come out of the cornfield and he'll be ready to go. And we will have a field built with equipment and processes and electrics and all of that stuff to make sure that that game can take place.
It's true. And I don't, even in the moments of going, like, in the moments of frustration or even the twinges of anxiety that come up and whatever it is, I know that everything that we're looking at everything's short term right now. It's short term pain, right? And that this is not going to be what exists in 3 days, 3 months, or 3 years, as you use the
law of threes.
The law of threes, and we will look back on this. And then ways that I play with it in myself, in my own head are, there are no cool stories that didn't have some sense of significant adversity, right? And so then I go, yeah, like this is just part of our story, because in many ways up to this point, it's been that like the universe has just provided. It doesn't mean we haven't had challenges and adversities along the way, but boy, was it kind of 1 step, 2, 3, 4. I mean, we just kept moving without a lot of kind of steps backwards. And now we've started to have some of those step backwards, not so much again from an internal perspective, although we have, as you mentioned, some processes and some systems, but also again, the external, from a regulatory perspective or payer relationships, things like that, where now the system is not aligning with Ava Health, right? Which of course we should go, well, that makes total sense. But the system didn't wake up on February 9th and just go, hey, Ava Health is here. Like, this is amazing, right? Like, they didn't even think about that February 9th was like a big day, right? Even though I that's what I would have hoped.
Sure. And honestly, I mean, I still go back to, because it's today, it could be different tomorrow. I still go back to saying that we built the field. It's empty at the moment. We built the field. We're going to, he waits through multiple seasons of weather, looking out at the field and waiting and waiting. And, and again, I'm stuck on the metaphor now. And then when they start to show up, they start to say things like, actually, there's a lot of people that want to be in this field and play. So again, for me, maybe it's a lesson in sort of a stoic approach. There's nothing I can do about that. I know what I can do, which is, again, I've created the architecture that will sustain things. Um, and I have to wait. I have to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're right. There is this sense of like, how dare I say it sometimes to people, like, we manifested this, right? We just kept going like, well, yes, it's going to work. It's going to work. And I haven't fallen into yet that space of like, of fear or worry, about the future. I mean, I think there's stress right now for me, again, just because of where we are in our cycle of growth and opening. My attention is turned very inward, very, very inward. Like, who signed this, and why is this 12 hours out of date in terms of following up on an incident report, and where is the environment of care, fire drill on the overnight for this month? Like, where is that? That's sort of where I am. And for me, again, that continues to tap that part of me, which is not just about creating internal structure, but creating internal structure as a steward to look out forward and say, oh, yes, we could do this in New Mexico, Wyoming, Idaho, Iowa. We could do this. Like, we are still on the track to show, like, this is the way rural healthcare for behavioral health should happen. Right?
Mm.
So I still see that as a shining North Star for me. But again, the reason is because the architecture that we built is beginning to find its full form. And so for me, once that architecture is there, it creates safety for everybody. It creates safety for staff. It creates safety for our clients coming in. It creates some consistency. And so that stuff, that stuff makes me happy. That stuff makes me feel grounded.
Well, and you talk about the architecture, and then I start to think about the culture and team dynamics and all of this. And I know we've chatted about this. It's, again, it's one thing when there's no patients in the building and everyone's around and we're onboarding and there's excitement and inspiration and all of this. And then yeah, one day it's real. And I think that there's also like team dynamics and really now you start to watch kind of everything come to the surface as well. And I think that's been another just big kind of learning experience with the size that we are. Again, maybe it's not 47 anymore, but mid 40s number of employees right around. And you start to see all of the previous employments come up and a lot of the things, and so much of the work are the connections and the relational work. And also there's that balance between agency and also just saying like, this just needs to be done, the fire drill, the incident report, this and that. And so like, how have you found just the interaction and the work, with the team through the process of the architecture's there, and yet the people that hold that architecture they're the humans, they wear shoes.
They are the humans that wear shoes, yes. And so, again, so some of the learning for me is that there is an architectural system in place. Now, getting that system to communicate within itself, some of those things have worked like just stunningly beautiful, right? And some of those things, you're right, there's still what do they say? As a human being, I can never rise above being human. Eh. And so it's a way. I think what I've discovered is there are ways that folks that we all work together communicate in such a way, and that under experience of stress or something not working, or I mean, that's mostly what our on the ground staff is like, how does this work? Like, how do I make this form work? How do I report this incident? How do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I get
dose spot to work? How do I get how does Ian stop getting the calls from the pharmacy? Um, uh, and what I found is that there's a sense of style that people have, and there's a sense of focus. And what we need to do is ensure that, that I'm understood, and that I seek to understand rather than, be understood. And so kind of what does that mean? So there's a really interesting experience that I've continued to resonate on and continue to work my way through understanding what it means, which is that a staff member comes to another staff member and says, our clients want to walk. They want to walk. And depending on who you ask, one person might say, well, yeah, of course they can walk. And another person might say, well, as long as they're under supervision. And both things are implicit, they're implied. But again, what's been interesting is how that lands on the person who's asking the question. And what we find is there's some polarization at times, right? Because we know just from a system, like if you take one position and take it strongly out of either my emotional content that's informing it, or just because that's the way we interact, like for you and I'm going to take the opposite position.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to engage in that, what is a dialectic, not an argument. And so if you ask me again, one of the learning team dynamics that I am continuing to recognize is so important is not consensus. What is so important is that we have a structure and a container here where we can disagree. We can have some conflict. We can say, well, I think it needs to be this. And somebody else can say, well, I think it needs to be this. And we can say, well, okay, but we have a structure, and then we have a mission and a vision, and we have values that operate inside that structure. So how do we take all those components to place? How do we make sure that both things are true? Clients can walk, right? They can walk if it is in the context about regulating their nervous system, not about avoiding and not engaging, right? They can walk, and they must always be under some visual supervision. Like both things are true. But isn't that a fundamentally, like, that's okay? Again, when I see that and look at it and think, okay, this is what I have to help staff understand, that both things are true. It's the same thing with clients, isn't it? Like you can chew heroin and love your children. Both things are true. And again, as I say, for me, sitting in that, like if I can hold the middle of that, that's as zen as I can get most days.
Isn't that true? I mean, and then also there's that piece of how the pendulum will swing
Yeah.
between those sides, right? Where you can come out and everything it's so loving and it's so caring and it's so held. And then we may forget that part of love is conflict and honesty and accountability and all of this and boundaries. And then we swing to the other side, which is far more heavy-handed and far more, a little bit anxiety driven and all of this, right? And it's like you said about holding that middle, right? Which is the answer typically does lie, somewhere right centered down there. And you're going to swing a little bit, to both sides, as we're going through those processes, and you're just working with people in the milieu. And hey, just a little feedback in the moment,
Yeah.
little suggestion here. And, so in addition to, the disagreeing, beliefs, which is really healthy, not beliefs, the disagreements on how we might do something, both can be true. That there are times when, being really stern and this is important, and loving and caring, and right, all of that also exists at the same time. Like, how do we balance that?
It does, and I think it's finding, I think so. I think in our working relationship, I have no issue with it, right? So, recently, again, this a discussion around how do we hold other institutions responsible, or accountable for the decisions they make and the things they say outright. How do we do that? And so that was that was an interesting moment. I think it was a couple weeks ago, like two maybe. And again, we had a discussion about
how should we publicly speak about something that's going on, which just doesn't really make sense, right? And so in our working framework, I believe that my responsibility is to challenge the shit out of you, right? Um, and to create, not to create conflict if there is none, right? To bring the conflict and the different view up out of the ether, actually, and right in front of us. And I think that's my responsibility. I think it's everybody's responsibility in here, certainly in leadership, and without question, I think it's everybody's responsibility to challenge that. And at the same time, and so I'm not doing my job if I don't challenge you, if I feel it needs to be challenged. If I agree with you and we should step forward, then that's doing my job as well. And what's been interesting is, I've not gotten a lot of traction on it. That's what I think's been interesting for me. That's the stuff that kind of makes me go, um, that's got to sit somewhere with me. In that, have I built the architecture to have we built the architecture, because it's been so many people together. Have we built an architecture that allows people to say, hey, no, wait, I don't agree with that. Like, I don't think that's the way to go. I don't think that, like a heavy hand, or like saying to them, you can't come back here now. You've left twice. You can't come back. I don't think that's right. I think we should give them another chance, and and that's been good. So that's allowed some of us to work a little bit inside that. My goal, certainly over the next 30, 60, 90 days going forward, is to, again, to develop that as an organizational culture, is to say, like your opinions and perspective is really valuable, and I need you to share it. Mhm. And so that's been a challenge. And I'll tell you my other challenge from staffing. I can talk about staffing, and it's a dynamic that I know sits with me. I had to say to one of our supervisors last night, I need something from you. Like, I really need something from you. And she paused, and I said, you have to hold me accountable. We've had a couple emails go back over the last couple days, where I've said, yeah, come, let's talk about that. Let's review that. Let's go forward with that. I said, I need you sometimes to come and say, hey, like, you said we were going to work on this today. Like, let's go. And it was a humorous moment. I mean, we laughed about it, which is different than that conversation that took place a week ago, and like 2 or 3 weeks ago before that, where I said, I got to stop. We got to stop this dynamic where I get sort of reactive about something that's not being done, and you apologize, and that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Challenge me.
Hmm.
I need that, right? So, and again, I think going back to something you said in the beginning, which is, and this is also like it's a reflective moment, that you're right. We've had a lot of staff come from um, settings where these values aren't operant. In fact, these values would be actively, um, uh, what would be the word? They would be actively discouraged, that a staff member would come and say, hey, I'm not sure what we're doing here is actually, achieving what we're trying to do. And I was thinking maybe we should do, like, we could do this, right?
Yeah.
And so that also has been a challenge, especially for the ops guy, right? Who wants to just simply create solutions, and, and is aware that, in our function as coaches and mentors and guides, um, we have to, we can't be therapists. We have to do what we can to help people to grow and change.
Yeah.
I think that dynamic has been the one that has been probably the most frustrating
Mm.
and the most delightful, or certainly with some hope that that we're on the path, and we're gonna get there. We're just a little further back down the path on that one.
Well, and you started by talking about a dynamic around accountability, and it's back to, for me, how systems move or don't move, and that's been by far the biggest challenge that I've experienced in the last 30 days. And it comes from many a place of, again, not not knowing where and how to create the necessary friction to create results.
Yeah.
And then,
Because what happens when it's not right, when it's not synced?
yeah. And so like when you would bring like, hey, like we got to hold these people accountable. I'm already there. And I'm like, and yeah, like how? Right. So, right, there's all these different ways. I mean, we're here, we're recording video content, social media, we have relationships, we have all of this stuff. Like, what's the move? Right. Like, and I've had to start thinking so much like a chess player, right? Like, am I moving a pawn right now, or a knight, or a rook? And right, what move is going to put us into this place? And also not knowing, right? Like literally, like the uncertainty that exists within a lot of how we are working to kind of push the system in different ways and to present information and to challenge things like the adequacy of the network that exists on the western slope of Colorado and some of these things. And it's like most of my life, it's reactive and fight, right? Like those are the quick ways, right? Just like bam, like get into it and knock down, drag out, and like let's do this. And then having to step back and go like, I fully agree. Like we are on the exact same page with accountability. And yet what is the right path to that? And that's been the biggest struggle and challenge for me, is having to sit in the feeling of reactivity or defensiveness and not make up a story in my head, and to not personalize what's going on, and to come back and say, like, even though I don't know if this is the right move, we've got to take it and we've got to see what happens. And we have to see, if we file single case agreements, what happens as a result of that, that then guides the next step. And you spoke about the idea of a little bit of patience and waiting. That has been by far the biggest challenge for me.
Oh, that's why I'm so patient then.
You've had to be, though, but that's part of the dynamic. And that's, I think, why you and I work so well together, is because when we know this about one another, is when I become really reactive or defensive or want to move, and you ground so deeply that it pulls me back down. And then it's the same thing with you. As you start to get up, I'll be like, so it's all good. Well, actually, no, I can't say it's all good anymore. We realize that. That's actually, it's like
an offensive racist statement to his chief operating officer.
it's all good. It's all going to work out. Yes. FYI, never say that to the COO, who's in it right now. But there's just part of that dynamic. And yes, like how do we not only bring that up between you and I, but then allow the rest of the organization to do that, which is really, what we want. Is we want the person that, cleans the bathrooms to literally say, like, this doesn't work with the patient flow.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so how do we continue to translate down and bring that up, which is that next step?
Yeah. And again, for me, like, how do we do that? We have to, like, modeling, I don't think has worked.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't worked as well as we wanted it to work, I mean, I'll reflect back on over the last 30 days, but, at the end of September of this year, I like, technically, like, lost my shit. And so in an effort to be different, and I am so different than then, in an effort to be different, I was very open about it. And with the entire team at that time, which I think was about like 14 people or something like that, and then continued to give like updates weekly about like how it was going. But like, I think people were impacted by it, and I think people saw that as something very different. I don't think anybody then took that as like a model and went, like, I can be vulnerable here. I can say I am struggling. I can say, hey, like, I don't want to show up that way. That was not good, right? And again, the modeling of it hasn't been sufficient. And what I know is, again, that there's always a mirror to find. And so one of that mirrors has been, as we take from our clinical team this notion of
the client has agency. Let's listen to the client. The client will tell us. If we listen carefully, the client will tell us things that are important to them, things that are of value to them, which is a treatment motivator. It's like you can't just train people in that and then say, and go out and do it now,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think what I have recognized is that for some of, particularly in our sort of residential part, in our housing part, some technical assistance, some being on site, some kind of saying, hey, like, I see what just happened. Let's talk about like this way that we could engage. And I've known for a while that that's kind of what has to happen. That's the way it needs to work. And um, you know, and so for now, we're just waiting for housing to fill up, right?
Yeah.
So that we can work through this, right? So again, I know the structure's right. I think it's back to what I was saying, which is sometimes it's about kind of giving people options and guiding them um, to become more creative in what they're doing, but to be driven by like intention, to be driven by how what's the best way to do this within this structure. Like this is what we believe. We believe in agency, right? And so it's not like they either have agency or they're under my thumb. It's about being creative about like how do we do that. And I think again there's work to be done about how we translate to staff who may not have all the clinical excellence, but have the values and the heart, the intention, and it's all connected. And sometimes it's about saying, well, you could try this. You could do this. You could say it this way. Right.
Well, I think you speak to something that's really interesting around modeling has not been enough. Right. I think for a lot of my career, that is what you would hear about leadership, right? Is show up in a certain way and model the behavior and be vulnerable and be accountable and all of these things. And then like the translation of that down. And it's like you said, not that doesn't have impact, but we have not seen the impact like we thought it would be. Right.
Yeah.
Like in any way. So now it's again, shifting gears and going, okay, like that was a thought we had was if we create the structure, the architecture, the value,
All that intention.
we live it, the leaders live it, just in the trenches.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but there's still so much more that needs to be done to really translate culture down every level.
So as a integrator, as an ops guy, we're going to continue to kind of drive that forward as I slide into, and I think I'm challenging us both to continue to grow and think about stewardship. What I recognize though is that intention begins to drift a little bit as we grow. And so the focus again has to be both the incident report before you leave your shift today, the incident report needs to be in, and like, how do we create an incident report structure that allows us that's efficient for our staff to do, and that then generates for us data that allows us to improve our system, right? Which keeps it safe, which allows people to function inside of it comfortably, which means that we're stewarding it on to the next set. And again, I haven't figured the answer out. It's still about having all staff feel like they have agency, which means that in this respect, they can disagree. That we can have conflict. The conflict's good. It's going to drive forward change and honing something down. So that for me that's the awkward piece at the moment. It is kind of doing that while because at the moment we don't have an executive director out here. While I'm sort of doing some of that grounding stuff, it allows me to continue to every now and then think about structure and legacy and moving it forward so that so wherever it is, whether again it's Idaho or Iowa or New Mexico or Arizona, that the structure has integrity.
Well, I think we will continue to download every few weeks and every few months on what the experience has been. And I hope that in some way this continues to not only be a helpful place for us to be able just to process more outside of, kind of closed doors, but for anybody that's around and watching and in the trenches and, building or growing or scaling or trying to fix or whatever, behavioral health organizations, that some of this provides insightful and, invaluable to what the experience is really like when, things are chaotic in a startup environment. And, some of the things that in terms of how we take a look at, 88 different things that we probably would like to be different, but ultimately like having this understanding that a startup it's like the birth of a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so often we as entrepreneurs, bloody, which it's pooping everywhere and it screams all the time at you and you don't know what's really wrong.
And you love it.
Right. And so often we want it to be 10 years old and we want to be sleeping and we want, all of these things. And yet an 18-month-old can't be a 10-year-old and a 1-month-old company can't be a 10-year-old company. And so even just realigning to the fact sometimes in that groundedness that like, hey, we may want all of these things to be in this way, but this is what it takes. It takes the time and the leadership and the stewardship to be able to say, how do we create the architecture and the people and mold it in a way collectively with everyone so that it can actually age appropriately into a 3-year and 5-year and 10-year-old company. And these are the moments, all gears. Hopefully, these are the moments that become so important to it all. So I love you.
I love you, brother.
Thank you for
It's the joy of my lot to be here and be able to speak this kind of openly, not to be reactive and angry about it. And I thought it was interesting at the very end what you said is that, and for whoever's seeing this, I hope that maybe there's some family members that think this is a little bit different. Like, I need to talk to those guys, and the way it looks like is I can go talk to these owners. Like, they'll take my call.
Yeah, this is the truth.
And I'm over here.
You can reach us anytime, and we are always out and about. Yeah, thank you, brother. Another edition of Inside Ava Health coming at you. Love you. See you guys next time.
See ya.